This training, hosted by the Capital Area Coalition on Homelessness, CACH, is on how to enter a homeless HUD client into ClientPoint, Medaware Information System Bowman ClientPoint, which is the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, for Harrisburg and Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, Continuum of Care PA 501. This training took place in October 2016. As an end user in Bowman ClientPoint, you'll be taken to the home page dashboard upon entry. You'll need to click on ClientPoint on the left side, and that will take you to the first window, Client Search, which is our first part of the process. Step number 1. In entering a client, you'll need to search if the client is already in the HMIS, and that is in order to avoid entering duplicate entries. In order to search if a client's already in the HMIS, we need to cast a broad net of search as wide as possible. So we start with a common denominator. We'll start with just a last name. In this case, we'll use the fictitious name example. We will then hit search, and we find that there are no matches. Then we'll broaden the search and add the first name. Do search again, and we find no matches. Then we broaden the search even more and add the Social Security number. Search, and finding no matches, we are pretty confident that there are no unique or duplicate entries for this fictitious example, any example. Then we can go ahead and fill in some of the quality data questions, whether the name is fully reported or partial, or the Social Security is fully reported, or whether the client doesn't know or refused. It also asks if the client is a U.S. military veteran. Now we can add this new client with that information. The next window it brings up is a backdate mode request. And if you're entering a client a few days after you've seen the client upon entering your program, you may wish to backdate it to the date of entry into your program. We will just use the current system date. However, if you do backdate, the green shade here turns yellow, just to let you know that you've been backdating. So we'll hit use current system date. The next thing it asks is to see if you want to enter the client as a single individual only, or whether the client is part of a larger household that's entering your program, in which case you'd want to add client and search households as well, just to make sure that there are no other households that are already in the system with that same client name and household name. We'll just add client only and show how to add members to the household subsequently. This then takes you to the Summary tab, and in the Summary tab you have sub-windows for all the different things that you'll need in order to enter the client's information. A process that's important to do is to always go from top to bottom and left to right. That way you don't miss anything, and also you go in the order that is required. For instance, if you went and did an entry-exit on the right side before you did the household, which is on the left side, and it's also here from left to right on the top tabs. This is also areas where you can enter the respective information. So back to the example, if you did the entry-exit assessment before you did households, then unfortunately every person who you enter later as a household will be listed as an individual household. So that's an example of why it's important to go from top to bottom and left to right, and using these tabs from left all the way to the right. The next tab is Client Profile, and in this tab, this is just a record of all the information that you've entered, and we do not have to worry about this tab at this point. The next tab, going to the right, is where you enter households. Now, if the individual is by him or herself, then obviously you will not need to enter any households and you can move on. However, if the person is a member of an extended household that came into your program, you'll need to add members of that person's household. Step number 2, linking members, dependents, children, or associates of a household to the client entry. So to add a member to a person's household, we need to create a household. Again, we need to search for existing households just to make sure that there are no households with the name example in it. We do not want to create duplicates, both of the client or of a household. Finding no matches, we'll add a new household. Then it asks us for the household type. We'll make this a female single parent. Here is where we can now enter the name of the dependent or associate that we are adding to that person's household. Let us add a dependent, a son, just an example. And let's again search to see if that person is in that household. There's no matches, so we now put a social security number just to make sure, again, that we do not have a duplicate, just because maybe they spelled the name wrong. And we search to see that there's no such persons, and we find that there are no matches. Then we can answer the rest of the questions just like we did earlier. So having entered all that information, now we can add this new client with that information. So now we've entered 2 people into this household, and we can continue. And we see that we created a household with a client count of 2. Now we have to establish the household members' relationships. Any example is the head of household, and that changes the relationship to self. Just an example isn't the head of household. Instead, he is the son. Now we can enter the next phase. So we'll save and exit. And now we can go to the next tab, going from left to right, which is the release of information. Step number 3, it is important to create and complete the release of information, because that is what allows all the agencies that are on the HMIS to see that that client is there already, so that if that client ever enters their program or receives their services and they do a check, they will be able to see that that client is in the system and not create duplicate records. Again, it is important to complete releases of information. So to do that, we go to the ROI, or Release of Information tab, and just simply click on Add Release of Information. We'll need to click on this button here, which includes all household members. And say whether the release was granted or not. The end date we need to make as far in the future as possible. That's because, again, it's for visibility's sake. If the release of information is active, all agencies in the HMIS can see that the client is in the HMIS. Don't worry if your release of information on paper has a different date. This is just for the computer's sake, and we're going to make it far in the future, let's say 2020. And you can choose how the document was documented, signed statement from the client, and then hit Save. And now you've successfully added the release of information. Step number 4, we can now enter the client's entry-exit assessment information. So moving from left to right, we go from Release of Information to the Entry-Exit tab. And here we add Entry-Exit. Again, we check all of the household members. And here we have to select HUD for the type. Save and continue. And now we are taken to the HUD COC and ESG entry window. And this is where you enter all the required information for the head of household. The questions are self-explanatory, and I entered the data for it. Most of the questions also relate to whether the person is chronically homeless or not. The last 2 questions, total monthly income, which I'll say is $520, and income from any source, yes. I just highlight them because they will be asked again in the next section, which are sub-assessment. Step number 5, complete client sub-assessments, of which there are 4: income, non-cash benefits, disability, and health insurance. So here are the 4 sub-assessment windows: monthly income, non-cash benefits, health insurance, and disabilities. In order to enter the proper answers to these questions, we'll need to click on this red exclamation mark icon next to HUD verification. And this icon is red in order to tell you that all the questions that need to be answered in this sub-window have not been yet answered. So in clicking on it, it gives us a list of all the different sources of income on which there has to be an answer: yes, no, or data not collected. You cannot leave them incomplete, because if you leave any incomplete, that red exclamation mark will remain so. Let's just click on no, so it gives an answer for everyone, but then that way we can just pick the one or two sources of income that person may have. I'll click on SSDI. It gives you another record set in which to put the amount in, and we had originally entered 520. We don't have to worry about the end date, and hit save. When we hit save and exit, we'll see that that red exclamation mark turned into a green check mark, and that meant that all the line item questions have been answered. Next thing, any non-cash benefits? Yes. Again, we'll go to the red exclamation mark there. That'll access all the various questions that we need to answer. We'll check on no, just to give an answer for everyone, but yes to supplemental nutrition assistance program. Save and exit, and it turns to a green check mark. So I continued and did the same thing for the other two sub-assessments and answered the questions, and therefore got the green check mark. Domestic violence survivor, we'll just say no in this case, and we don't need to answer the next two questions related to that. The outreach window is only for supportive services for outreach, and unless you're a supportive services for outreach program, you do not need to answer this question at all. Save and exit, and you have successfully entered that family into an entry-exit assessment, and you can tell that you've done it correctly because there's a client count of 2. And again, the reminder says household members must be established on the household tabs before doing the entry exits, and that's why it was important to do the order from left to right. We established the household members, and then we did the entry exit. However, we now need to also enter some basic information for those household members. Step 6, do not forget to also enter all household members' basic information. So in order to do that, we can go to this tab here which says switch to another household member, and we can go from any example to the dependent Justin example. Submit. And now how to add their basic information as we go to the client profile tab. And here we click on the edit client demographics, and here's where we add that person's information. Having done so, we just hit save, and then we've added the client's basic demographic. Then we can return back to the head of household again by going to that switch to another household member. Submit. You've successfully entered a client and their dependents, but you will also need to do interim assessments, usually annually. To do an interim assessment, you go to the Entry-Exit tab, and you go to this column which says Interim. That's where you add your interim review. There you pick whether your interim review is, if you're a shelter, you don't have to worry about it. Your exit review will suffice, and shelters are usually only 30 days long. But most programs, it will be an annual assessment at the date of their anniversary. So we'll say it's 2017. Save and continue. And that'll take you to the portal where you can update or leave blank if there are no changes, any interim changes for that client. Save and exit. And there you've successfully entered an interim review. For rapid rehousing, your reviews may be 30 or 60 or 90 days. Step 8. When the client exits your program, it is important to do an exit assessment or closeout. Again, to do this, you need to be on the Entry-Exit tab. And again, it's important to exit that, or else your data will be skewed and the amount of time that person remains in your program will be longer than it is. So we hit this Edit button. We select the whole household. We select the whole household, enter the questions, save and continue. And similarly, it gives you the exit assessment to fill out or leave unchanged. And there's your exit date. This concludes this training.